plus have your own module for looking at 3D modeling components. So in webinar 10, we're going to look at foam modeling, we're going to consider how we use laser modeling, and finally we're going to have a look at modeling with ArcIT. The aims and objectives behind this tutorial is so that you can understand the process of 3D modeling and to be able to communicate ideas using modeling techniques, and then to be able to rationalize the outcome to inform how the 3D model relates to your initial ideas. So basic objectives is engage with the simple modeling process, develop the skills, and finally be aware of the risk associated with using modeling materials such as craft knives. Under risk assessment, I've set out a series of materials that we would use for the 3D modeling, and to the associated risk associated with each of these elements. So primarily is that there's certain things that we will not use. So we will not use inflammable solvents. We're only going to use cutting knives that have retractable blades. Knives are not to be carried around the learning environment, and working surfaces are to be flat and secure. So for the modeling, we're going to use foam board, we're going to use corrugated card, we're going to use a craft knife with a retractable blade. We need to make sure that we've got a sharps container with a self-closing lid. We're going to use Pritt stick or glue pens. We can use a roll of white single-sided adhesive tape. So part 1 for modeling. In order to get the model into a format that we can use our layout book, and we can import the views from our SketchUp file. So we can set these to either 1 to 50 or 1 to 25 scale, depending on the size of the model that we wish to create. We can then lay them out onto an A3 layout book, and then we can print the pages, and we can use those pages to cut out our various components. And finally, we can finish off the model by applying textures. So I've looked at the mossy wall, and I've actually modeled this up in SketchUp. I've applied some people to it just to give it scale, and I've exported this as an illustration. The actual oversized view of the mossy wall itself in real life would measure 4 meters by 4 meters. The framework around the outside is around about 400 millimeters. And literally, I've analysed the model itself and actually created some in the region of about 9 or 10 different components that we can cut out, shape, and format. So the materials, we're going to require an A3 cutting mat. We're going to require safety rulers, and we can bond our cut out A3 papers to our foam board. So by applying to the foam board, what it allows us to do, it allows us to give us a space that we can cut around, and we can carefully cut around each pieces of our components. As an alternative to foam board, we can use card, or we can use paper. Foam board has its advantages. It gives it thickness to it, but it can also be it's literally only a temporary model. So if we look at the front elevation, we can cut out our space, and we can use our Pritt stick and white tape to actually form our frame and to insert our panel. So by making the frame in one piece, we can actually cut the corners at 45-degree angles to actually wrap it round the space itself. For the bench seat, I'm using blue corrugated card. So simply by scoring one side, we can then use the safety ruler in order to bend it. So initially, all we need to do is make sure we've got the correct width. As far as assembly is concerned, we can then use our Pritt stick or our double-sided tape to actually assemble our model. And then finally, we can then apply our textures. We might apply a photograph. But you've got to bear in mind that these models don't last forever, so we want to photograph them. So by setting it up with a little tiny background image, putting a figure in or a car in, that's enabled to actually give it some scale. We can actually create our 3D image from our model. So moving this on to laser modeling. Again, what's going to happen is we're going to use SketchUp to create our components. We're going to extract those components into the view settings, and then we're going to use the layout book, and then we're going to import the model, and then we're going to export the model to DXF format or to a vector file format. And on completion of the DXF file, that then can be exported to the laser cutter. And finally, once we've got all the parts back, we can then assemble them by using a PVA glue. So what is laser cutting? It's a technique that predates 3D printing by almost 10 years. Inside the laser cutter, it uses a laser beam to generate using special carbon dioxide filled tube and channeling to a movable laser head. So it's only creating cutting from a flat sheet. They can't do 3Ds. And then consequently what happens is that we can then work around to actually create our model. I've included a couple of links to YouTube which explains it in more detail of how a laser cutter works. So let's have a look at the 3D model itself. So when we've completed our SketchUp file, we can then go to export, and then we can go into DWG DXF format. We can set what form of software we're going to use and which version. And you'll see that what happens is that the way that a laser cutter works, it uses a red line for actually cutting out, and it uses a black line for engraving. So we've got our components, they're all cut out, and then what happens is we will simply assemble them together to actually create our 3D model. Here is an example of a laser cut model from MDF. And finally, let's look at ARKit. ARKit is Lego for grown-ups. It gives us a series of module components that we can use to assemble to articulate our ideas. ARKit have been working with a class of your own for quite a number of years. And so, but what it does, it gives us a modeling system very similar to Lego that we can use to develop and formulate our ideas. It has its limitations, but the fact is some of the modules that go with the kit are a little bit limited, but it still gives us a process. I have exported to you a SketchUp file with ARKit components built into it. But if you go into the 3D warehouse and if you type in ARKit objects, It will give you the objects which have been created, and simply you can then import it into your SketchUp file. So here's an example of something which was assembled using those components. So very similar to what we can do within SketchUp, we can bring in people in order to actually populate it, in order to actually produce our illustrations.